TV, and today it's all about the sewing machine, learning about the parts of the sewing machine, how they work, how they function, and why it's important to have these. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it. There's about 16 to 20 things every sewing machine should have. This one has about 18, okay? So let's talk about each part and why they're very, very important. Every sewing machine, every single one, unless you're getting one from the 1500s, should have a foot pedal. Foot pedals are super, super important because they gauge how quickly you are going to be sewing. Just like a car, if you're driving a Ferrari or if you're driving a Pinto, you need to figure out how fast you're going to push down on the pedal. If you want to go 100 miles an hour, if you want to go 10 miles an hour. It's all about how quickly and hard you push down on that foot pedal. So the foot pedal should be on every single sewing machine. Has to have one, okay? The next piece is the hand wheel. Hand wheel is always located on the right side of your sewing machine. It's more or less there so that it can help you move your needle up and down and move the thread guide up and down if you don't want to push your foot on the foot pedal. If you're getting really close to the edge and you don't think that you're going to be able to make it because you're starting to kind of get a little finicky with your foot pedal, use your hand wheel. The hand wheel is always good to use, and always do it in an up or away from you motion. That's considered the forward motion, up and away, okay? Moving from this, we're going to go down the sewing machine. So up here is the stitch width regulator. Sometimes the stitch width regulator is located in the front, but on this machine it's located on the top. The stitch width regulator is just basically for you to figure out how wide you want your stitches to be, okay? I have a really great little demonstration for you right here that shows you the stitch width regulator, okay? What it actually does, what number it should be on. Every sewing machine, if you're buying it brand new, should have a manual, and the manual should tell you every single thing that your sewing machine does. So just take the time to read it. I know I'm not a big reader, you might not be a big reader, but it's really important that you read at least the width, the stitch length regulators and what they do, okay? The next one down is the stitch length. The stitch length regulator, which is also located over here, a very nice little visual, is made primarily for your straight stitching. If you want it to be really close together, if you want your stitches on top of one another, or if you want them pretty far apart, okay? So the 0.5 is meant for stitches that are super on top of each other, and the 4 is meant for stitches that are farther away from each other. And that's just the length of stitches. How much space do you want in between them, okay? So moving down, we're going to go to the pattern selection dial. This pattern selection dial is made primarily for buttonhole stitches, for your straight stitches, and then for the fancy stitches. Always, always make sure that you know your straight stitch before you do any other fancy stitching. Fancy stitching can be a pain right in the rear if you don't know what you're doing, and if you're going too fast or too slow, you need to make sure that you are getting it and getting a hang of it, because a lot of times we say, oh, I really want to do this pretty stitch on this because it'll look nice, and then it turns out looking like crap. So you always want to make sure that you do the straight stitch first and then start practicing with the other stitches on maybe some of your rough fabrics or your other cutted fabrics that you're not using, okay? So from here we're going to move back over by where the needle is, and this is the reverse stitch. The reverse stitch you have to do at the beginning and end of all of your stitches, okay? So if you're starting, you need to do at least 4 or 5 reverse stitches, and if you're ending, you need to do at least 4 or 5 reverse stitches. This is going to make sure that your fabric doesn't fall apart when you're wearing it, when you're tugging at it. If you have a toddler that's constantly pulling at you, this will make sure that it doesn't fall apart, okay? So moving from the reverse, we're going to go back on top of the sewing machine again. This is the tension regulator. Tension bases your fabric on the heaviness. Is it a heavy fabric? Is it a really light fabric? Light fabric might be a sheer. Heavy fabric might be the fleece fabrics, or 100% cotton with a different backing to it. Maybe you're quilting. Those are heavier fabrics. So you always want to make sure that you're doing a practice on the same fabric so that you know what the tension's like, so that you don't have to use your seam ripper, because seam rippers are not fun to use. They might be fun initially, and then they're no fun anymore. Okay, needle position. Needle position is on every machine as well. They have that CLR, center, left, and right, just like the game. Figure out which one you like best. Sometimes it might tell you in your pattern if you're making a dress to use the left. I like using the center because I like things really symmetrical. Okay, moving back. This is the spool pin. Spool pin is based for your thread. Your thread is going to be housed here. So I have a pretty pink thread. One thing to make sure that you know about thread is that not all of your thread that you're going to be getting is going to have this small holder. Sometimes the holder is the same width as the thread, and if it is, it's going to have a little nick in the plastic piece which holds onto your thread when you first get it. So you want to make sure that if it has that little nick, which you can kind of identify with your finger, that you place that nick towards the back part of it so that it doesn't mess up when your thread is being pulled from the spool. Okay, following from the spool pin, we're going to go over, and there's at least 1 or 2 thread guides that help to guide your thread so that the thread's not going all over the place. So you want to make sure that you make your thread go through 1 or 2 of these thread guides. Okay, then you're going to move down the thread guide and then up again into your uptake lever. This is your thread uptake lever. This makes sure that your thread is going to be moved up and down into your needle. So you just want to make sure that your thread is into that thread guide uptake. Otherwise, you're going to have a really big mess when you're sewing. You're going to have to, once again, use that beautiful seam ripper that everyone loves to hate. So we're going to move down into the heart of the sewing machine where everybody sees the action taking place, and that's the needle. You have to make sure that you are putting your thread through that needle and making it nice and taut, nice and tight, nice and taut, however you want to say it, tomato, tomato. And through this, the needle is going to go through what is called the presser foot. The presser foot is what keeps your fabric from moving and kind of bumping up and down. So when you have your fabric underneath it, you always want to use the presser foot lifter, which is located in the back or on the side of your machine, to put the presser foot down, and also lift it back up when you're done sewing it. Underneath the presser foot is a feed dog. It's these kind of sharp-ish teeth that move your fabric forward and move your fabric back. Okay? Around the feed dog is the throat plate. The throat plate has all of these measurements on it, moving from 7/8 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch. And this is more or less going to be sold on your pattern. Please sew at 5/8 of an inch, which is generally considered the rule of thumb, or sew at 7/8 of an inch. And it's a guide for you when you're sewing, just so that you know what to do. Okay, so that is the throat plate. And then in here, where I'm going to be lifting it up, which you can see, is where the bobbin is held. Bobbin is super important. We're going to talk about threading your bobbin correctly so that you don't mess up and get frustrated. But this is where your bobbin is housed and where it stays, okay? Located up on the other side of the sewing machine, opposite of your hand wheel, is the thread cutter, okay? The thread cutter is a really nice thing to have. Not every sewing machine has it, and it saves you much time in getting out your scissors and having to cut with your scissors and having to cut with, you know, a seam ripper if you don't even have scissors handy. This makes it really, really easy for you to cut, okay? So one more thing that I forgot to tell you about, which I should have told you about already, is the bobbin winder. So if we can move over and talk about the bobbin winder, you have to wind your bobbin. I don't know why I forgot about it, but I did. So we're going to talk about it now. This is the off position for the bobbin. When you're winding the bobbin, you always move it over to the opposite side where this is, and that's going to help you to wind your bobbin. Super duper important, okay? And now that we've talked all about the sewing machine and we know the sewing machine parts, it's time for you to stop listening to me, stop watching me, and start sewing and having a good time, okay? So I'm going to get sewing, and I think you should get sewing, and then we can show each other the wonderful things that we've made, right? Okay, have a good time. I'm Megan for Wowak TV, and come back and visit me.